The cantina on Terminus Station always smelled like a mix of alien sweat, burnt fuel, and cheap alcohol. Smoke from a dozen different worlds hung in the air like ghosts. Warriors from across the galaxy sat at round metal tables, drinking and telling stories that got bigger with each glass. Kethvar sat in the corner, his forearms wrapped around a tall mug of purple liquid. The Vraxian warrior was hard to miss. His gray skin was covered in thick plates like natural armor. Scars ran across his chest and arms in white lines that told stories of old battles. His reptilian eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. Around his table sat soldiers from different worlds. There was Zix, a tall, blue-skinned centaurian, whose people were known for their speed. Next to him was Gorga, a short but wide creature from the mining worlds whose rocky skin could stop most bullets. A few other mercenaries and fighters completed the group. The conversation had been going on for hours. Each warrior tried to top the others with tales of the most dangerous enemies they had faced. Zix had just finished talking about fighting giant spider creatures on Arachnos Prime. Gorga told them about the acid-spitting lizards of Venom 4. Then a young Zephyrian pilot named Clix spoke up. His green skin was smooth and unmarked by battle scars. His voice was full of pride as he talked. "You want to hear about real savages?" Clix said, leaning forward. "I fought humans in the Outer Rim conflicts. Those creatures are nothing but animals. They fight dirty, use primitive weapons, and scream like beasts when they charge. No honor, no skill, just raw violence." The table went quiet for a moment. Then a sound came from Kethvar that made everyone's skin crawl. It was like metal scraping against rock, but it was laughter. The Vraxian's mandibles clicked together as he set down his drink. "Humans?" Kethvar said, his voice deep and rough like grinding stones. "You think you know humans, youngling?" Clix puffed up his chest. "I know them well enough. Fought them for 6 months. Barely civilized creatures, if you ask me." Kethvar's yellow eyes fixed on the young pilot. The other aliens at the table shifted in their seats. They had all heard stories about Kethvar. He was one of the few warriors who had survived the siege of Proxima, the Battle of the Twin Suns, and the horror that was the Kepler campaign. 6 months, Kethvar repeated slowly. "I fought alongside humans for 3 full campaigns. 3 years of my life spent watching them, learning from them, trying to understand them." He paused and rubbed one of his secondary arms across an old scar on his shoulder. "What I learned changed everything I thought I knew about war." The cantina around them seemed to grow quieter. Other tables of aliens stopped their own conversations and turned to listen. Word traveled fast when Kethvar started telling war stories. "You see, Clix," Kethvar continued, "every species in this galaxy thinks they understand combat. We Vraxians believe we are the greatest warriors because of our strength and our armor. The Centaurians think speed wins battles. The rock people believe their tough skin makes them unbeatable." He gestured with one clawed hand toward the listening crowd. "The Kalthons think their size and reach give them advantage. The Zephyrians believe their technology makes them superior. Every species has something they point to and say, 'This is why we are strong in war.'" Crix's green skin was starting to turn pale. "And humans? What do they have?" Kethvar's laugh came again, that horrible scraping sound. "That's the thing, boy. Humans don't have any of that. They're not the strongest. They're not the fastest. They don't have the best armor or the most advanced weapons. Their skin tears like paper. They break easily. They're short-lived and weak." He leaned forward, his massive frame casting a shadow over the table. "But I watch them do things that still wake me up at night. I watch them turn their weaknesses into weapons. I watched them fight in ways that made no sense to any logical mind. And I watched them win battles they had no right to survive." The young pilot swallowed hard. "What kind of things?" Kethvar picked up his drink and took a long sip. The purple liquid left stains on his mandibles. Around them, the cantina had gone completely silent. Even the bartender had stopped cleaning glasses to listen. "Let me tell you about the siege of Kepler 442b, Kethvar said. 47 days of hell. My regiment and a human marine unit got cut off from the main force. Surrounded, outnumbered, no supply line, no hope of rescue. He set the mug down with a heavy thud. Now, we Vraxians are proud of our warrior spirit. We train from birth to fight. Our culture is built around honor in battle. But after 2 weeks without food shipments, with our ammunition running low, even my people started to break. We began to talk about surrender, about negotiating terms with the enemy. Kethvar's eyes grew distant, as if he was seeing something far away. But the humans? He shook his massive head. The humans seemed to get more dangerous with each day that passed. While we grew weaker, they grew stronger. While we lost hope, they found new reasons to fight. I watched human soldiers with broken bones continue their duties. I watched them make weapons from scrap metal when their energy cells died. I watched them maintain perfect unit discipline even when their officers were killed. The warrior's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. On day 38, I watched a human private named Chen crawl through 6 hours of enemy fire. His legs were broken from shrapnel. His left arm was useless. He was leaving a trail of blood behind him, like a wounded animal. But he crawled for 6 hours to reach a damaged supply drop and bring back ammunition for his squad. Kethvar looked directly at Klix. When he finally made it back, bleeding and barely conscious, you know what he said? He apologized for taking so long. The cantina was silent except for the hum of the station's life support systems. That was my first lesson about humans, Kethvar said. They don't just fight until they die. They fight because they're dying. Every injury makes them more desperate. Every setback makes them more creative. Every loss makes them more terrifying. He reached for his drink again but stopped halfway. Would you like to hear more stories, young pilot? Or have you heard enough about these barely civilized creatures? Klix nodded slowly, his green skin still pale. The other aliens around the table leaned in closer. Across the cantina, conversations had stopped completely. Everyone wanted to hear what the famous Vraxian warrior would say next. Kethvar took another drink and began his story. The siege started when our fleet tried to take the mining colony on Kepler 442b. The planet was rich in rare metals that both sides needed for shipbuilding. Intelligence told us it would be an easy victory. Light defenses, small garrison, quick in and out. The warriors' mandibles clicked in bitter amusement. Intelligence was wrong. The enemy had been building underground fortifications for months. When we made planetfall, they let us land. Then they closed the trap. Orbital defense platforms we didn't know existed opened fire on our ships. Those that survived had to retreat. My regiment and the human Marines were left behind. Kethvar gestured with his upper arms while his lower arms stayed wrapped around his drink. The human unit was from their 3rd Marine Battalion. About 200 soldiers led by a Colonel Martinez. Tough old female with gray hair and scars on her hands. My regiment had 400 Vraxian warriors. We thought the numbers were good enough to break out. He paused and rubbed one of his scars again. For the first week, everything went as expected. We fought during the day and held defensive positions at night. The humans fought well for such small creatures. They used cover effectively, and their weapons were accurate, but they were just another military unit to me then. The cantina was so quiet that the sound of someone setting down a glass seemed loud. By the 2nd week, things started getting bad. Our food supplies ran low. Ammunition was carefully rationed. Medical supplies were almost gone. My warriors began to show stress. We Vraxians are strong, but we need a lot of food to maintain our strength. Kethvar's yellow eyes grew distant again. The humans, they just adapted. While my people grew irritable and weak from hunger, the humans reorganized their meal schedules. They started eating smaller portions more often. They found ways to make their rations last longer. Some even gave their food to wounded comrades who needed more nutrition to heal. He set his drink down and used all 4 arms to gesture. Week 3 was when I started to really notice the differences. My warriors were grumbling about the situation. Some talked quietly about the possibility of surrender. We had sent 3 requests for rescue and gotten no response. Morale was dropping like a stone, but the humans started doing something strange. They began telling stories. In the evenings, after the fighting stopped, they would gather in small groups and share tales. Some were about their homeworld. Others were about famous battles from their history. Many were about soldiers who fought against impossible odds. Kethvar's voice grew thoughtful. I listened to these stories. One was about a place called the Alamo, where a small group of humans fought against thousands of enemies. They all died, but their sacrifice gave their army time to regroup and win the war. Another story was about soldiers at a place called Thermopylae, where 300 warriors held off an enemy army for days. The alien warrior looked around the table at his audience. What struck me was not the stories themselves, but how the humans reacted to them. These tales of defeat and death made them stronger, not weaker. They drew courage from the memory of their ancestors who had faced impossible situations. Zix, the Centaurian, spoke up. But surely they had limits? Everyone breaks eventually. Kethvar's laugh was grim. Week 4. That's when I learned humans don't break the way other species do. We started taking casualties from disease as much as enemy fire. The underground bunkers were damp and cold. Infection spread quickly. My warriors began to fall sick. He pointed to a scar on his neck. I caught the fever myself. Spent 3 days barely conscious. When I recovered, I expected to find the human unit falling apart like mine was. Instead, I found something that still gives me nightmares. The warrior paused for dramatic effect. The humans had organized themselves into a perfect support network. Healthy soldiers took extra duties to cover for the sick. Those too weak to fight became ammunition carriers or communication runners. Those too sick to leave their beds became spotters and radio operators. But here's the part that truly frightened me. The sickest humans, the ones who should have been useless in any logical military structure, became the most valuable soldiers in their unit. Gorga, the rock-skinned miner, frowned. How? Because humans who know they're dying become absolutely fearless. I watched a Marine named Williams, barely alive from infection, volunteer for the most dangerous missions. He said he was going to die anyway, so he might as well make it count for something. Kethvar's voice dropped lower. Williams crawled into an enemy tunnel system that none of us dared enter. He planted explosives that collapsed their main ammunition depot. The explosion was so big, it shook the ground for kilometers. Williams didn't make it out, but that one action gave us the advantage we needed to survive another week. The aliens around the table exchanged uncomfortable glances. Week 5 was when I saw Private Chen make his crawl for ammunition. But Chen wasn't unusual by then. I watched humans do impossible things every single day. Sergeant Park fought for 12 hours with a broken rib that punctured his lung. Corporal Adams continued her duties as a sniper despite losing 2 fingers on her trigger hand. She learned to shoot left-handed in one afternoon. Kethvar stood up, his massive frame towering over the table. Week 6. The rescue ships finally arrived. By then, my regiment was down to 150 effective warriors. We had lost more than half our strength to death, wounds, and sickness. I was ready to recommend that any Vraxian survivors be given medals just for lasting that long. He looked around the silent cantina. The human unit? They still had 140 active Marines. Not only had they taken fewer losses than us, but they were still organized, still disciplined, still ready to fight. Colonel Martinez greeted the rescue ships by requesting ammunition and supplies to continue the mission. The warrior sat back down heavily. That was when I realized that humans don't measure defeat the same way other species do. We lost half our people and considered it a disaster. They lost 60 soldiers and considered it an acceptable cost for completing their objectives. He picked up his drink and drained it completely. After the rescue, I spoke with Colonel Martinez. I asked her how her people stayed so strong when mine grew weak. She looked at me with those strange human eyes and said something I'll never forget. Kethvar's voice became very quiet. She said, "We don't get stronger when we're dying, Kethvar. We just stop pretending we're not already dead." Then she walked away like she had said something perfectly normal. The cantina remained silent for a long moment. That was my second lesson about humans. They don't fear death because they've already accepted it. And that acceptance makes them the most dangerous soldiers I've ever seen. The silence in the cantina stretched on for several heartbeats. Some aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others stared into their drinks as if trying to process what they had just heard. Klix, the young Zephyrian pilot, looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. Kethvar signaled the bartender for another drink. The purple liquid arrived quickly, carried by a nervous-looking server who didn't want to interrupt the story. That siege taught me much about human endurance, Kethvar said, taking a sip. But it wasn't until the Battle of the Kalthoran Dreadnought that I truly understood human tactics. He set the mug down carefully. This happened 8 months later. We were part of a joint fleet attacking a Kalthoran stronghold in the Vega system. The Kalthorans had built a massive warship called the Hand of Dominion, 7 kilometers long, armed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Kethvar's forearms moved as he described the ship's size. Kalthorans are dangerous opponents. 7 feet tall, 6 arms each, reflexes like lightning. Their homeworld has heavy gravity, so they're incredibly strong. In close combat, they're nearly unbeatable. One Kalthoran warrior can handle 3 or 4 normal soldiers without breaking a sweat. Zeeks nodded. I've heard of them. Their boarding parties are legendary. Exactly, Kethvar continued. So when our fleet disabled their dreadnought's engines and prepared to board, everyone expected massive casualties. The ship had over 3,000 Kalthoran warriors aboard. Our assault force was only 800 strong. He paused to drink. I was assigned to boarding Team 7 with 60 Vraxian warriors. We were supposed to take the engine section. Boarding Team 3 was all humans. 45 Marines, led by a Captain Rodriguez. They got the worst assignment, the command section, right in the heart of the ship where enemy resistance would be strongest. The warrior's expression grew thoughtful. I remember thinking the humans had drawn the death mission. No way 45 soldiers could fight through hundreds of Kalthorans to reach the bridge. I expected to hear their radio signals go silent within minutes of boarding. Kethvar laughed, that harsh scraping sound. I was wrong. Within 30 minutes, the humans had not only reached their objective, but had taken the command center. My team was still fighting for every corridor, and the humans were calling in to report mission success. Gorga leaned forward. How? What did they do differently? That's what I wanted to know. After the battle, I requested full combat recordings from their helmet cameras. What I saw. Kethvar shook his massive head. What I saw changed how I think about warfare entirely. He gestured with his upper arms, while his lower arms stayed wrapped around his drink. The humans didn't fight like any civilized species would. They used what I can only call tactical insanity. They deliberately put themselves in impossible situations to create advantages. Kethvar's yellow eyes fixed on his audience. First example, Sergeant Morrison. She was leading her squad down a corridor when they encountered 20 Kalthoran defenders in a strong position behind energy barriers. Any rational commander would have called for support or found another route. He paused for effect. Morrison ordered her squad to take cover, then she stepped out into the open and let the Kalthorans shoot her. Several aliens gasped. Klix's eyes went wide. She wore light armor, so their energy weapons put her down immediately. Her squad started screaming about their sergeant being killed. But Morrison was still alive, just badly wounded and playing dead. When the Kalthorans moved forward to confirm the kill, Morrison triggered the grenades she had attached to her armor. Kethvar's voice grew quieter. The explosion killed half the enemy force and stunned the rest. Morrison's squad rushed forward and finished them off. Morrison survived, barely, but she had turned her own body into bait for a trap. The cantina was completely silent now. Second example, Corporal Vega. His team needed to cross a section where Kalthorans had set up overlapping fields of fire. No cover, no alternate routes. The aliens could hit anything that moved in that space. Kethvar took another drink. Vega noticed that one wall of the corridor was the ship's outer hull, so he used his plasma cutter to deliberately cut a hole in it. Zix's blue skin went pale. In space? That would cause explosive decompression. Exactly. Vega triggered an emergency hull breach right in the middle of a firefight. He and his team used magnetic boots to stay anchored while the atmosphere rushed out. The Kalthorans, who weren't prepared for vacuum combat, got sucked into space. Kethvar's mandibles clicked together. Vega's team crossed that corridor by walking on the walls in zero atmosphere, then sealed the breach and continued their mission. They turned the ship's own structure into a weapon against its defenders. The warrior stood up and began pacing behind his chair. But the most disturbing thing was their battle cry. Throughout the entire boarding action, every time the humans encountered resistance, they would shout something in their language. "Remember the Alamo?" He looked around at the confused alien faces. I researched this phrase later. The Alamo was an ancient battle on their homeworld, where a small force of human defenders was completely wiped out by a larger army. Every single human died. By any logical measure, it was a total defeat. Kethvar's voice grew intense, but humans remember it as a victory. They turned a devastating loss into a source of strength. When they shout, "Remember the Alamo," they're saying that dying for a cause is better than living without one. He sat back down heavily. During the boarding action, I heard that battle cry 47 times. Each time, it marked a moment when the humans chose to accept terrible risks to achieve their goals. And each time, they somehow found a way to turn those risks into advantages. The warrior picked up his drink but didn't sip it. Captain Rodriguez led the final assault on the bridge personally. She kicked down the door and walked into a room with 12 Kalthoran officers, each armed with energy weapons pointed at the entrance. Kethvar's eyes grew distant. Any other species would have used grenades or called for backup. Rodriguez just walked in alone, knowing she would probably die, and started shooting. Her team followed her through the door before the Kalthorans could react properly. He finally took a drink. Rodriguez survived that assault with 17 energy burns across her body. When medical teams reached her, she was still conscious and still issuing orders. She refused treatment until every Kalthoran on the ship was confirmed dead or captured. The warrior looked around the table. After the battle, I asked Rodriguez why her people fought so recklessly. She looked at me like I had asked a stupid question and said, "We weren't being reckless. We were being efficient. The fastest way to win was to accept that some of us were going to die and work around that fact." Kethvar's voice dropped to a whisper. That was my third lesson about humans. They don't just accept death as a possibility. They integrate it into their battle plans. Every other species fights to avoid casualties. Humans calculate casualties as part of their strategy, and then execute that strategy perfectly. He drained his mug completely. The Kalthorans are still considered some of the best warriors in the galaxy. But after that day, none of them will board a ship if they know humans are on it. They learned the same lesson I did. Fighting humans isn't about defeating soldiers, it's about defeating an entire philosophy of war. The cantina remained silent, except for the sound of Kethvar setting down his empty mug. The bartender approached Kethvar's table with another drink, moving carefully as if afraid to make noise. The entire cantina had become an audience for the Vraxian warriors' stories. Even aliens at tables across the room had stopped their own conversations to listen. Kethvar accepted the fresh drink and nodded his thanks. When he spoke again, his voice was softer than before, but somehow more unsettling. The siege taught me about human endurance. The boarding action showed me their tactical thinking, but it was during the conflict with the hegemony that I learned about their minds. He rotated the mug between his 4 hands, watching the purple liquid swirl. The hegemony war was different from other conflicts. It wasn't about territory or resources. It was about information. The hegemony wanted to control communication networks across 3 sectors. Intelligence gathering became more important than firepower. Kethvar looked up from his drink. I was assigned to a joint task force with human intelligence specialists. Our mission was to locate and destroy hegemony data centers. These facilities were hidden in civilian areas and protected by advanced security systems. The warrior's yellow eyes grew thoughtful. The humans brought their own intelligence officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh. Small woman, maybe 5.5 feet tall. Brown hair always tied back neatly. Quiet voice. She looked like she would break if you squeezed her too hard. He took a small sip of his drink. Walsh was good at her job. She could analyze enemy communication patterns and predict their movements with frightening accuracy. But I didn't think much of her combat abilities. She looked too soft, too civilized for war. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in what might have been embarrassment. I was wrong again. He paused and rubbed one of his scars. 3 weeks into the mission, our team was ambushed while investigating a suspected hegemony facility. The attack came from multiple directions at once. We fought our way out, but Walsh got separated from the group during the retreat. The warrior's voice grew grim. By the time we regrouped and planned a rescue mission, the hegemony had captured her. Intelligence reports confirmed she was being held at a detention facility 50 kilometers from our position. The building was heavily guarded and designed specifically for interrogating prisoners. Kethvar set his drink down carefully. Now, the hegemony were experts at breaking minds. Their interrogation techniques could make anyone talk eventually. They used drugs, psychological pressure, and advanced technology to extract information from prisoners. Very few beings could resist them for more than a day or two. He looked around at his audience. We assumed Walsh would be dead or completely broken within hours. Human minds weren't supposed to be able to handle hegemony interrogation methods. The task force commander started preparing for the worst. We would have to change all our communication codes and abort our current missions. The warrior's laugh was quiet but chilling. We were monitoring hegemony communications, hoping to learn something about Walsh's condition. After 12 hours, we intercepted a message from the detention facility requesting additional interrogation specialists. After 24 hours, they requested a psychology expert. After 48 hours, they were asking for help. Several aliens at nearby tables leaned closer to hear better. The reports we intercepted were strange. The hegemony interrogators were having problems with their prisoner, but not the kind of problems they usually had. Walsh wasn't breaking down. She wasn't giving them information, but she also wasn't resisting in any way they recognized. Kethvar took another drink. On the third day, something incredible happened. One of the hegemony guards requested a transfer to another facility. He claimed he couldn't work effectively anymore. A few hours later, another guard made the same request. The warrior's voice grew softer. By the fourth day, the detention facility was in chaos. Half the guard staff had requested transfers or called in sick. The interrogation team was reporting that their prisoner was somehow interfering with their work, but they couldn't explain how. He gestured with his upper arms. Meanwhile, Walsh was still in her cell, apparently cooperating with all interrogation sessions. The hegemony couldn't understand what was wrong with their people. Clix, who had been silent for most of the evening, finally spoke up. What was she doing? Kethvar's yellow eyes fixed on the young pilot. That's what we wanted to know. When our rescue team finally reached the facility, we expected to find Walsh either dead or completely insane. Instead, we found something much more disturbing. He paused for dramatic effect. Walsh walked out of that prison cell looking perfectly calm and healthy. She had detailed maps of the entire facility memorized. She knew the names, ranks, and personal information of every guard who had worked there. She had psychological profiles on the entire interrogation team. The warrior's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. But most importantly, she had extracted complete information about 12 other hegemony facilities from her captors, without them realizing it. The cantina was so quiet that the sound of someone breathing seemed loud. You see, while the hegemony thought they were interrogating her, Walsh was actually interrogating them. Every question they asked revealed something about their operations. Every technique they used gave her insight into their methods. Every conversation with a guard told her something about facility security. Kethvar rubbed his scarred shoulder, but she did more than just gather information. She systematically destroyed the psychological stability of everyone who came in contact with her. She didn't threaten them or resist them. She just talked to them. The warrior looked around the table. Walsh identified each person's fears, doubts, and weaknesses through normal conversation. Then she used those discoveries to plant seeds of uncertainty in their minds. She made guards question whether they were doing the right thing. She made interrogators doubt their own techniques. She made facility commanders worry about their competence. He took a longer drink. The hegemony guard who requested the first transfer told his commander that the human prisoner seemed to know more about his family problems than he did. Another guard said Walsh had given him advice about his failing marriage that turned out to be exactly right. The interrogators reported that their prisoner was somehow making them question their own beliefs about the war. Kethvar's mandibles clicked together. Walsh had turned her cell into a psychological warfare laboratory. She was using her captivity as an opportunity to study enemy personnel and extract intelligence. Instead of being a victim, she became a predator. The warrior stood up and began pacing again. When I asked Walsh how she had accomplished this, she explained it like it was perfectly normal. She said that humans have spent thousands of years learning to read each other's emotions and motivations. Social interaction is a survival skill for their species. He stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. Then she said something that still gives me nightmares. Every conversation is an intelligence operation if you know how to listen properly. 9. Kethvar sat back down. The rescue mission reports showed that by the time we arrived, the hegemony facility was completely dysfunctional. Guard discipline had collapsed. The interrogation team was filing requests to be transferred to other duties. 3 staff members had suffered nervous breakdowns. His voice grew even quieter. Walsh had been in that prison for 4 days. In that time, she had caused more damage to enemy operations than our military units had accomplished in weeks of combat. She turned her own suffering into a weapon against her captors. The warrior finished his drink in one long gulp. That was my 4th lesson about humans. They don't just endure torture, they weaponize their own pain. While other species try to resist interrogation, humans study their interrogators and turn the entire process into an opportunity for psychological warfare. He set the empty mug down with a heavy thud. After that mission, the hegemony changed their policies about capturing human prisoners. Their new standing orders were to avoid taking humans alive whenever possible. They decided that killing humans in battle was safer than trying to interrogate them. Kethvar looked around at the silent faces surrounding him. Think about that for a moment. The hegemony, experts at psychological manipulation, became afraid of capturing humans because they couldn't predict how a human mind would respond to imprisonment. They learned that every human prisoner was a potential intelligence disaster waiting to happen. The cantina remained completely silent for a long moment. That was when I realized that human warfare isn't just about physical tactics or psychological endurance. It's about turning every single interaction, even defeat and capture, into an opportunity for strategic advantage. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Aliens throughout the cantina sat frozen in their seats, drinks forgotten, staring at the massive Vraxian warrior who had just shattered their understanding of human warfare. Klix, the young Zephyrian pilot who had started this conversation by calling humans savages, looked pale and shaken. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his drink. Finally, it was Gorga, the rock-skinned miner, who found his voice. "What you're describing?" Gorga's rough voice was barely above a whisper. "It doesn't make sense. How can a species be so effective in war when they're physically weaker than most of us?" Kethvar signaled for another drink, though his previous mug sat empty before him. When the bartender brought the fresh purple liquid, the Vraxian warrior stared into it for a long moment before answering. "That's the question I asked myself for 3 years," Kethvar said. "Every species I know became good at war because of some physical advantage. We Vraxians have natural armor and incredible strength. Centaurians have speed that lets them strike and retreat before enemies can respond. Calthorans have size and reach that makes them deadly in close combat." He looked around at the various alien faces watching him. Every species in this galaxy evolved from either predators or prey animals. We understand war because we understand hunting or being hunted. We know about territory, resources, dominance. These concepts make sense to us. Kethvar took a small sip of his drink, but humans evolved differently. They didn't become the dominant species on their world through strength or speed or armor. They became dominant through something much more terrifying. The warrior set his mug down carefully. Humans evolved from persistence hunters. Several aliens looked confused. Zeeks, the Centaurian, spoke up. "What does that mean?" Kethvar's yellow eyes gleamed in the dim cantina light. "It means that humans didn't need to be faster or stronger than their prey. They just needed to never give up. Human ancestors would pick a target and follow it for days, sometimes weeks. They would chase their prey across vast distances until the animal collapsed from exhaustion." His mandibles clicked together softly. "Think about that for a moment. While other predators developed claws or fangs or speed, humans developed the ability to just keep going. No matter how tired they got, no matter how long it took, no matter how impossible the odds seemed, they would continue pursuing their goal. The warrior's voice grew more intense. That instinct didn't disappear when they became civilized. It just found new targets. Instead of chasing animals across plains, they chase victory across battlefields. Instead of wearing down prey through endurance, they wear down enemies through sheer persistence. Kethvar stood up again, his massive frame casting shadows across the table. Every other species in this galaxy fights to win. We measure success by territory gained, enemies killed, resources captured. We understand victory and defeat as clear, definable outcomes. He began pacing behind his chair. Humans fight to not lose. And to a human mind, those are completely different concepts. You can destroy their armies, capture their territory, kill their leaders, and they still won't consider themselves defeated, as long as some humans survive to continue the fight. The warrior stopped pacing and looked directly at his audience. That's why human war stories celebrate defeats like the Alamo or Thermopylae. To human thinking, those weren't defeats at all. They were successful delaying actions that bought time for eventual victory. Every human death in those battles was an acceptable exchange for strategic advantage. Gorga shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But that's insane. How can you win a war by accepting defeat? Kethvar's laugh was quiet but chilling. Because humans don't measure victory the same way we do. When we fight a war, we want to gain something: territory, resources, power. When humans fight a war, they want to ensure that their species, their ideas, their stories survive. He sat back down heavily. We fight wars to win them. Humans fight wars to make sure that someone, somewhere, remembers that they fought. As long as the human story continues, they consider every battle a strategic success, even if they lose every tactical engagement. The warrior picked up his drink but didn't sip it. That's what makes them so terrifying as enemies. You can't break their will by defeating their armies because their armies are expendable. You can't break their spirit by destroying their cities because they'll build new ones. You can't break their hope by killing their leaders because they'll promote new ones from the ranks. Kethvar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. The only way to truly defeat humans is to completely exterminate every single member of their species. Anything less than total genocide just gives them time to regroup and continue fighting. The cantina was so silent that the background hum of the station's life support systems seemed loud. But here's the truly terrifying part, Kethvar continued. When humans fight alongside you, that same insanity, that same refusal to accept defeat, that same willingness to die for abstract concepts, all of that protects you too. His yellow eyes grew distant. I have never felt safer in battle than when I had humans watching my back. They don't abandon allies. They don't retreat when things get difficult. They don't calculate odds and decide a fight isn't worth their lives. The warrior's voice became thoughtful. During the siege of Kepler 442b, I watched human soldiers give their food to wounded Vraxian warriors. During the boarding action, I saw humans risk their lives to rescue alien crew members they barely knew. During intelligence operations, human officers shared classified information with alien allies, even when it put their own missions at risk. Kethvar took a long drink. Humans extend their persistence hunter instincts to their allies. Once they decide you're part of their pack, they'll chase victory for your sake with the same relentless determination they show for their own species. He set the mug down and looked around at his audience. But I have never been more afraid than when humans were my enemies. Because when you fight against humans, you're not just fighting soldiers or weapons or tactics. You're fighting against an entire philosophy that says dying for the right reasons is better than living for the wrong ones. The warrior's mandibles clicked together slowly. Every species in this galaxy has survival instincts. We fight to stay alive, to protect our territory, to secure resources for our offspring. These are logical, understandable motivations. His voice grew very quiet. Humans have survival instincts too, but they're willing to override them for abstract concepts like honor, duty, or justice. They'll choose certain death if they believe it serves a larger purpose. and that makes them unpredictable in ways that terrify other species. Kethvar stood up one final time and looked around the silent cantina. I've fought alongside the greatest warriors this galaxy has produced. I've seen courage, skill, and determination from dozens of different species. But humans, he paused, searching for words. Humans fight like they're already dead, and just trying to decide how much damage they can do before their bodies catch up with their spirits. The warrior reached into a pouch on his armor and placed several credit chips on the table to pay for his drinks. Young pilot, he said, looking directly at Clix. You asked me about humans. You called them savages and animals. You were right about one thing. They are animals. But they're the most dangerous kind of animal. Predators who evolved to never stop hunting. Kethvar began walking toward the cantina's exit, then stopped and turned back one last time. If you ever find yourself fighting against humans, remember this. They're not trying to win the battle you're fighting. They're trying to win the war you don't even know you're part of. And they've been practicing that kind of warfare for thousands of years. The massive alien warrior disappeared into the corridor beyond the cantina entrance, leaving behind a room full of silent, thoughtful aliens. For a long time, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The only sounds were the distant hum of machinery and the quiet clink of glasses as the bartender cleaned up around tables full of customers who had forgotten they were holding drinks. Finally, Clix set down his glass with shaking hands and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. I think I need to find a different career. The young Zephyrian pilot stood up on unsteady legs and walked out of the cantina, leaving behind his drink and his illusions about human warfare. Around the room, other aliens began to stir, whispering quietly among themselves about the stories they had just heard. Word would spread quickly through the station's corridors, and from there to ships heading for distant worlds. By tomorrow, half the galaxy would be talking about the Vraxian warrior who had explained why humans were the most terrifying soldiers in known space. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, human ships continued their patrols, their crews unaware that they had just become the subject of legends that would spread fear across 100 worlds. The hunt never stopped.